We often hear the phrase that we want to be the church and not just attend the church. One of the ways that our church fellowship has begun to work this out and understand it is something we call concentric circles of love. We have to begin with the idea, with the assumption that as followers of Christ, we're all missionaries. That each of us is on a mission and we have a mission field. And it's going to look different for every one of us. What we've learned is that your mission field can be discovered by simply asking yourself two questions. Where do I live and where do I work? And if you will really begin to ask those questions and to try and see your mission field as where you live and where you work, that's a great place to begin. And here's why. We believe that God has made every one of us exactly who He called us to be. The scriptures tell us He's given each of us individual specific gifts and calling and talent and ability. And because of that, He knows who we are. He made us who we are. We also believe that it's not an accident that we work where we work, or we go to school where we go to school, or we live where we live. That all of these things are part of God's plan for our life. So if you ask yourself the question, where do I live? Where do I work? And we say, I'm called to be a missionary there, in that place. Some of us are school teachers, and we've begun to understand that their mission field is their 5th grade class that they teach. Others have realized that their mission field are homeless people that God puts in their path on a regular basis as part of them going throughout their day. For some of you, your mission field may be your own family members who don't yet know Christ. So even though we are all missionaries, it's going to look different for each one of us. It won't always look the same. So if we begin with this idea that each of us is a missionary and each of us has a mission field, how do we live that out? How can we be the church in that place? And this brings us to the idea of the concentric circles of love. We want to think of it as a target. So if you started with the center point of a target and then move outward until you get the edges of those circles, and we're going to look at each one of those components. The center of our circle is Christ. They asked Jesus a question in the New Testament, what is the greatest commandment? Jesus' answer was, the greatest commandment is to love God with all your heart and all your soul and all your mind and all your strength. And then he volunteered something else. He said, the second greatest command is like the first, and it's this, to love your neighbor as yourself. And this is a key ingredient. This is a key idea for us to understand, that loving God and loving others, that these ideas are connected. All through the scriptures we see this borne out. The idea that you cannot say you love God and hate your brother. If you do, you're a liar. Jesus says, whatever you've done for the least of these, He says, you've done it to me. So the way we treat others and the way we love God are reflective of one another. So it's very important for us to keep these things together, loving God and loving others. So if we begin in the center of our circle with loving God, it has to begin there. The kind of love that we're to share with the world, it can't be our own love. It can't be this selfish, self-centered. I mean, that's the kind of love we're born with. We have to be filled with the love of Christ. And if His love is filling us, if we're really centered on learning what it means to love God, to put Him first in our lives, to seek His face, to meditate on His Word, and just very practically, the next ring of that circle would be our actual family members, our spouse, our children, our mothers and fathers, our brothers and sisters, the people that God has put in us in relationship with from the beginning, our family. We need to learn how to love them sacrificially. Not just, again, to love them because, I love my children, I love my wife, but I would love them in a sacrificial way, in the way Jesus would call me to die to myself, to put my needs aside in favor of their needs. If we can't do that, we're inconsistent. We have to have integrity in the way we live out the love of Christ. The very next circle outside of that would be the family of God that we are born into by the blood of Christ. We need to learn how to love one another, and that's not easy. It's challenging. It's a difficult thing to do. I think it's one of the reasons why Jesus commanded us to love one another, but that's part of our calling, and we're called to love one another, again, with this love of Christ that first He pours into us, and that we're then empowered by His Spirit to share with them. Now, outside of that circle would be our actual neighbors, who lives on the left or the right or across the street from you. Because again, God made you who you are, and He put you where you live. And He put you in relationship. His intention was that you would have an impact in that neighborhood. The next circle will be your coworkers. Who do you work with on a regular basis? Who are you in relationship with? And how can you learn how to share the love of Christ in a very practical way with those people that God has put in your life? And then outside of those circles, we would go out to the poor in our community, the people, the stranger that we come in contact with on a regular basis. They're not coincidences. God has put them in our life for a reason. And He wants us to have an impact on their life for the kingdom. As important as it is for us to learn how to love God and how to love one another, we also have to learn how to allow God to love us and how to allow our brothers and sisters to love us as well. We also need to be careful not to think of these things as sequential. In other words, if we look at our target, we can't say, well, I'm really struggling with the second and the third circle, and so I'm not really qualified to go outside those circles and share the love of Christ, let's say with the poor or the stranger or with a coworker. And that's a mistake, because let me just be honest with you, you're never going to be perfect at any of these circles ever. And so all that's going to do is hold you back. It's going to prevent you from actually living out what is God's intention for your life. And so it has to be holistic. It has to begin with Christ in the center, and then we are called to live all of them out to the best of our ability as God gives us grace. In some areas we're going to fail, in some areas we're going to succeed, but it needs to be something that we're doing on a regular basis consistently. And really that's what it means to be the church, to be the body of Christ, to be ambassadors of Christ, to be missionaries in our culture, in our families, and in our church, and to do it in a way that's consistent with who we're called to be as followers of Christ.